Hi, I want to share some thoughts about controversial literature and provide two examples so that I can illustrate uh, kind of the context of these questions that I'd like to ask you. And hopefully we can get some good discussion going here as a result. So this first text, I know I shared this at the beginning of the semester as one of my favorite books, and I don't know, you probably don't recall, but um, Philip Pullman, he wrote his Dark Materials. It's a series of three texts, and I read The Golden Compass when I was in about sixth grade, and I remember just being so enchanted by it. It transported me to another world, but it was kind of like a parallel universe to our own, with a lot of focus on scholarship in a college or a university that's similar to Oxford University in England. It's called Jordan College, and there's this conflict between what we would see as maybe the Catholic Church and educational institutions. So it's this constant conflict between science and religion. But when I read it, all I could think of was just how enchanting it was, and all I could see were parallels between things that we as members of the church understand, like the nature of the soul as both a body and a spirit, and the presence of parallel universes and the use of science in creation, and some of these ideas that are kind of like post-Christianity and or just out of the norm for traditional Christians. And I just thought it was so fascinating. I loved it. I read it several times. I encouraged other people to read it, and I read the whole series. And I remember when the movie came out, I was an adult and married with a child. A lot of press came out with it. And I remember reading some articles about it in which Philip Pullman was interviewed. And when he was asked to tell what The Golden Compass is about, this is what he said. My books are about killing God. And yes, that is in there, but I always took it to be almost a parody or a satire, where I saw that he was really encouraging the fact that there's a larger force at work here, and there's more than what we see going on. And I was just so brokenhearted when I read this, and I thought, does this mean I need to kind of denounce this text? Do I need to step away from it and feel really hurt that it wasn't what I believed it was? So that's one example. Another example is The Cat in the Hat, something as benign as Dr. Seuss. And we are reading the Lorax this week, so I think this is an appropriate time to have this discussion. So The Cat in the Hat, many of you with children now that are in school now are probably familiar with the Read Across America program. It's a week, I think it's usually in like February or something, where reading is celebrated, and The Cat in the Hat and Dr. Seuss are kind of the poster icons for this initiative. And it's kind of come up in several studies that, wait a minute, is this the right thing? Because there's a lot of evidence that Dr. Seuss perpetuates some racist ideas. And I had always kind of heard that in the last few years as a teacher, and I thought, as somebody I feel like I have lots of good reasons to be anti-racist. I still kind of felt like I'm not seeing that in Green Eggs and Ham and a lot of these texts that I felt like had fabulous rhymes and syntax and even really positive messages. I didn't feel like kids would pick up on some of that racism. And I want to share some of this research with you, and then I'll share an experience I had that kind of affected me personally. So what was found when some of this research was done is that several of Dr. Seuss's most well-known texts have a lot of racial stereotypes that they're kind of undertones. So it's not something that you usually will consciously pick up on unless you're looking for it. But that makes it even more dangerous in that, or this is what the research says, in that it can kind of like subliminally influence the way that children perceive race and people of color. And this is especially relevant the last few weeks that have been so traumatic for the Black community in particular. So Dr. Philip Nell, children's literature scholar and university distinguished professor of English, presents extensive research that the racialized origins of The Cat in the Hat, as inspired by blackface performance, racist images in popular culture, and actual African Americans. And so this is a picture of what would have been considered minstrelry, where there's this idea of kind of like this bumbling, comedic, subservient Black man who's there to entertain and who is badly behaved and comes and influences white children in a negative way. And that's kind of what's going on in The Cat in the Hat. And you can see how some of even the illustrations are mimicked here. Now, I've always kind of, or not always, but for the last several years, I've kind of grappled with this idea and wondering, does this mean I need to dismiss everything that Dr. Seuss writes? Do I have to let go of any value there in order to maintain the fact that I am anti-racist and I do not want to perpetuate these ideas? So what I'd really like to know is, what do you think about this? Do we encourage the reading of these texts for their value, even if it is tainted? Or do we discourage the reading of these types of texts to either maintain our belief systems or prevent what we deem are damaging belief systems? And I'd really like to know what you think. In the link here, I'll post a little blog article that I wrote that affected me, about an experience that affected me personally in this regard. You don't need to read it, but if you're interested, I'd love to know your thoughts.